Okay, we will get started right now. So welcome everyone to the Regional Stability and Nuclear Disarmament panel. We have with us two scholars, each of course, presenting their papers on related issues. The first we have Adérito Vicente, who is presenting from Porto, Portugal. Today, he is out of the European University Institute. He's going to be presenting Middle East and the Dialogue on Nuclear Disarmament, a European Approach. And we also have Riad Kahwaji, who is going to be presenting from Dubai, which is this evening in his time. But this afternoon here, he's going to be presenting the dime powers of the UAE as potential effective tools for regional stability. So I am going to have Adérito set up his presentation, and I will introduce him right now. So here's Adérito presenting once again, Middle East and the Dialogue on Nuclear Disarmament, a European Approach. So you can take it over, Adérito.
So thank you, Scott. Thank you so much, and thank you, Riad, for also being here. Also, thank you for inviting me for this event. I'm very grateful. And so let's start. So first of all, I just want to say that it's going to be always an approach from a European, and my thesis is about EU foreign policy in the field of nuclear disarmament. So it's going to be always an approach from with the European approach. So just bear that in mind. So let's start. So I'm gonna divide my presentation in 5 parts: overview, historical achievements, European role, obstacles, and possible solutions for the nuclear disarmament dialogue in the region. So first of all, just for you guys to know, what is nuclear disarmament? So I borrowed this, I follow this definition, which is both the act of reducing and eliminating nuclear weapons. Of course, I understand this concept as both the process and the desired end, which is the state, which is elimination, the complete elimination of these weapons. But of course, disarmament is also reduction, and it is also a process towards that reduction and towards that elimination. So let's start with, because we talk about nuclear disarmament in Middle East. So it's important for us to tackle nuclear weapon-free zones, because that's really what is the most important thing on this dialogue, is to try to impose a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East. So just a quote from Antonio Guterres, which is the Secretary General of the United Nations. So it says basically that, sorry, I'm just confusing here. It says basically that first and foremost, nuclear weapon-free zones put a permanent end to the possibility of nuclear conflict. So what it's trying to say is that if we have a nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East or in another region in the world, it's harder to have some kind of a nuclear war or nuclear conflict there. So that's what is basically a nuclear weapon-free zones. So a group of countries cooperating regionally through a legally binding agreement to free entire region from nuclear weapons. So this is a bit more details about this free zone. So the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 3472B from 1975 basically defines what is this nuclear weapon-free zone. It is basically it's a region has a total absence of nuclear weapons, and this also has an international system and the verification control that oblige the states that are within that region, within that free zone, to comply with obligations. And I'm just gonna try to simplify. So the characteristics of this nuclear-free zone are basically, as I said before, must be international binding treaty, must ensure the total absence of nuclear weapons within this zone. A verification and a control system should be established also in this zone. The geographical zone of application must be clearly defined and must be recognized by the General Assembly. Furthermore, the principles and guidelines. So in 1999, the language that the UNDC report, the United Nations Disarmament Commission, basically said that also this free zone should be arranged on the basis of freely arrive at among the states of the region, and the initiative must emanate from the states that are within that region. And but that doesn't exclude that in that region nuclear energy for peaceful purposes could exist. At the same time, the nuclear weapon states they should provide negative security assurances. Nuclear weapon states are the P5, the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council: United States, Russia, China, France, and UK. So what basically is this kind of responsibility of the nuclear weapon states? It's which is basically the negative security assurances, is basically all nuclear weapon states are eligible to join these zones through additional protocols, these negative security assurances, and they provide legally binding commitments to this to a given treaty from this zone. So basically, their commitment to these zones is they would not use nuclear weapons, and they would not threaten the countries within those regions with nuclear weapons. So this is just an overview of the current nuclear-free zones all over the world. So basically, that's what we have now. On the left, Latin America with the treaty local, and then Africa, and also we have here the central region with some former Soviet states, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and so forth, and also we have this region that has also Oceania, Australia, New Zealand, and other parts. And then there's also, so this is basically the areas in the globe that are recognized as nuclear weapons free zone. And if you see also in this legend, for instance, in the question of Latin America, all the P5 they adhere, so they give negative security assurances, and also in Africa. But in this region, some of them they are not given yet. So, for instance, the Treaty of Bangkok, they haven't given or. So, but basically, what are the obligations? So that region, they cannot manufacture nuclear weapons, they cannot possess nuclear weapons, they cannot develop nuclear weapons, they cannot test, and they cannot export nuclear materials unless is provided, granted by the International Atomic Energy Agency. So that's it. So, but let's talk about the Middle East nuclear-free zone itself. So perhaps I'm gonna just go a bit fast forward on this part, but basically there were historical achievements with this nuclear-free zone. It started as an initiative in 1958 with the Soviet Union, and then there was a group of intellectuals in Israel in the 60s that called for the inclusion of the Middle East, and then Iran and Egypt start to negotiate a resolution calling for that, and also the League of Arab States, they endorse it, and then the UN Secretary General published a report on that. And then, very important, in 1978, the UN General Assembly special session, they basically called for the creation of this nuclear-free zone in the Middle East. Another important date, for instance, in the 1990, there was the Mubarak initiative that expanded the scope of this nuclear-free zone to other weapons of mass destruction. And then, let me just go for a very important date in 1995, the NPT Review Conference adopted the resolution to the Middle East, calling on states to take practical steps to make progress this this nuclear-free zone that also included the other WMD weapons. So basically, when we talk about this WMD free zone, we're talking about nuclear, chemical, biological, and also their delivery systems, which can be missiles, planes, bombers, all these kind of weapons that can transport nuclear warheads or other type of weapons. Yeah, so recently there was this promoted by UN Secretary General Guterres. This is the first session on the conference to establish this Middle East nuclear-free zone, and also the last one was the second session was in 2021. So, but let's just talk about the approach of the European role, which is basically some findings that I took also from my doctoral research. So first of all, we can say that in the beginning, through the 60s, 70s, and so forth, France supported the Iraq and Iranian nuclear programs to produce nuclear weapons. And France and Germany also helped to create the Israeli nuclear weapons program, directly and indirectly. So this is what the classified documents say, and also, so this is basically very much given. Some of the European initiatives to tackle, to promote nuclear disarmament and this nuclear-free zone in the region started after 1992, because after 1992 is when the European Union got a common foreign policy with the Treaty of Maastricht, and also for that matter, they also had a foreign common policy on nuclear disarmament. So one of the first examples is just the 1995 Barcelona Declaration, and then in the NPT Review Conference in 1995, and then Action Plan in the NPT Review Conference in 2010, and then in 2012, the European Union decided to support the process of confidence building leading to this nuclear-free zone. And most importantly, in 2019, there was a process to support the confidence building on this to establish this nuclear-free zone. And now, for instance, just an example, the EU funds the UNIDIR's Middle East WMD free zone project, which is very important to promote this, to highlight, to give information about it, but also to promote the debate and solutions to construct this nuclear weapons free zone. So, but in this dialogue, the EU has a direct approach and the indirect approach. So in the direct approach, the EU basically organizes capacity building workshops and events, funds projects, as I mentioned before, negotiates in various multilateral disarmament forums, and through European Parliament resolutions and Council decisions to institutions from the European Union. They also express the will to establish this nuclear-free zone. The indirect approach is basically private and bilateral meetings with states from the region. The EU reaffirms its commitment to a resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, based on the two-state solution is also important to make sure that this, if that part is somehow has a resolution, so therefore it's easier for the EU to implement this nuclear disarmament and promote it. Also, the JCPOA was very important because one country, at least Iran, they pledged not to pursue nuclear weapons. And the CTBT demarches, it's the comprehensive treaty, test ban treaty, which bans all nuclear tests in the world, but is not yet, it didn't enter into force yet. So, but constraints about this dialogue. So policy towards Israel has been broadly in existence. I will explain later. There is a deterioration of compliance with the JCPOA currently, but for instance, the United States and other countries are trying to revive it. The diplomatic efforts of the EU towards this nuclear-free zone has been broadly ineffective, and new member states have different interests and approaches. And for instance, Finland is one of the most staunch supporters of this idea to promote a conference with all these states from that region, and therefore to build a consensus toward that. So, but other member states don't have that approach. Obstacles. So just for you to have an idea, this is basically the most important countries from the region. And you say, just to say, Israel has nuclear weapons, is the only nuclear weapon state. Iran tried to pursue, it has these problems. Turkey, because it's a member of NATO, has nuclear deterrence and is a nuclear sharing state because has tactical nuclear weapons from the United States in their territory. Saudi Arabia, because of this rivalry with Iran, sometimes open to pursue also this kind of program. Egypt in the past pursued, Syria as well, and the United Arab Emirates, tried also in the past. But now I think there's no problem. So this is also other regimes. I'm just going back, just because for lack of time, I'm just trying to finish this. Challenging conditions for establishing this nuclear weapons-free zone. There are conflicting goals within all these countries, the national security interests, rivalry, endemic mistrust, ongoing tensions in the region, divergent views in the region about the causes for nuclear proliferation. There are still some countries that think that if they got nuclear weapon states, they are protected. Divergent approaches towards nuclear disarmament, and of course, there is no security framework or regional organization where members in the region can discuss this. This is just this is the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, which is another treaty, and this is just for you guys to see that the countries from this region, they have different approaches towards this treaty. And in fact, only one that is not yet recognized by most of the states, which is Palestine, it's the only one that actually is in this treaty because it's in their interest to have, because their neighbor Israel has nuclear weapons. And then also Algeria and Libya that is also ahead on this process. And of course, Syria he didn't vote to be on this treaty, but it declares that it wants to be, but it's not. So it has this kind of ambiguous position. And then of course Turkey it didn't vote because it's part of NATO, so it cannot. So, but basically, why we have these obstacles? The conditioning factors that I've seen, international point of view, is that deterioration between U.S.-Russia relations and the collapse of arms control non-proliferation treaties between the two countries is a factor. Disagreements over Article 6 of the NPT, deterioration of compliance with the JCPOA, and of course, the current NPT reconference process and the nuclear disarmament dialogue is currently stuck. Regional constraints, Israel nuclear Mimut policy. Mimut has to do with opacity. So the Israel, everybody knows they have nuclear weapons, but they don't declare it. So it's hard for states in the international law, international fora to tackle Israel because they don't declare they have nuclear weapons. So it's very hard from legal point of view. The Israeli-Palestinian peace process. It's a factor because, of course, as I mentioned before, proliferation of weapons. Major regional parties are non-parties of WMD agreements. There's no compliance. There's violations of NPT and chemical weapons regimes. Of course, the turmoil in the Arab countries since 2011 doesn't help because there's some conflicts going on. And of course, the concerns over proliferation of nuclear and missile capabilities. And just to finish, suggestion that I've seen in the literature and possible solutions for this deadlock. Promote a friendly international environment cooperation between major powers, namely US and Russia, of course, that do super nuclear powers, and also have some proxies in the region, as we all know it. Foster inclusive dialogue and among experts and policy makers on regional security issues. As well, try to find the best mediator, even though the best mediator should be someone for the region, but it's very hard. So the EU and some countries of the EU, sometimes they don't want to offer themselves, but sometimes there's this perception that they will. To preserve the successful ideas from earlier diplomatic policy work that you can see these diplomatic historical achievements that we've seen in the past. The participation of all key states is essential. That must be shared interest, not just the goal, but also how to achieve that. Just not just go directly to the goal, but creating conditions to achieve that nuclear weapons-free zone. And finally, launch confidence-building measures among all parties, including states, but also not just states, non-state actors, and the civil society in the Middle East. So this is basically my presentation, and if anyone wants to, I can explain better some of the more hermetic concepts that I've made. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Adérito. I think what we're going to do is we're going to move on to Riad, and then if you have any questions out there for the audience, if you can just spill those into the Q&A function down there, we can get to the comments, or any questions or any comments that we have. So we'll do a discussion after we finish up with Riad. So thank you, Adérito. And Riad Kahwaji is going to discuss the dying powers of the UAE as potential effective tools for regional stability. So you can take it from here, Riad. You're on mute, by the way, still.
Sorry about this. All right, so
Are you good, Riad? Do you need
Yeah,
anything? Okay.
all right, we got it. I don't know why it's not moving. It's the,
You had it there for a sec.
yeah, but it's, yeah. You see it now?
Not right now. That's fine right there.
Okay. That's the problem when we're getting here. Okay, that's it. Now we got it. All right, sorry about that. Thank you, Dr. Scott. Thanks for the organizers for this opportunity. Today, we're talking about the dying power of the UAE and potential effective tools, using it as an effective, potential effective tool for regional stability. The UAE has made significant progress since it gained independence from British rule 50 years ago. A state of less than 1 million people has managed to attract at least 8 million people from around the world to help turn it into a major tourist destination and a busy central hub for trade and commerce between East and West. It's believed to hold the world's 7th largest proven oil and gas reserves and produces about 2.77 billion barrels of oil per day. The UAE is a progressive country that managed to create an attractive system and infrastructure to many multinational companies and entrepreneurs to set up offices, businesses, and factories in all sectors. It leads the region in e-governance development. Located in a volatile region and neighboring a large state like Iran that has shown hostile intentions towards most Gulf Arab states, and having economic interests with powers in East and West, the UAE has often found itself before hard choices with respect to its foreign policies. However, the UAE appears to have learned over the years to utilize its military and economic capabilities, as well as its soft power of information and diplomacy to protect its interests and achieve its objectives on the international arena. DIME is a concept that combines the main instruments of power the country can use to serve its objectives and protect its interests. They comprise the hard with the soft powers of the state. The soft power, according to Joseph Nye, is the state's ability to get what it wants through attraction rather than coercion. Peter Haney believes that soft power can mean anything from having a vibrant popular culture to symbolic appeals meant to persuade other states to take one's side. Nye contends that the powers that could be used for coercion are hard powers, and subsequently, names military and economic powers as hard powers. Kodal et al. Argues that diplomatic power revolves around negotiations, mediations, and agreements, while information power rests on gathering information and controlling or influencing its dissemination. Hence, both are soft powers, while economic and military are hard powers. However, some researchers, like Andrea Iona Pinzario, refer to the dime concept as the smart use of the nation's four main powers. This presentation will focus on the smart employment of the dime powers, soft and hard, as means to serve the state's foreign and security policies. This presentation argues that the UAE has intelligently employed its dime powers to project its foreign policy and safeguard its interests globally. The UAE appears now to be employing its dime power to de-escalate the mounting tension between Iran and Israel, and to also help kickstart the stalled Israeli-Palestinian peace talks. The study contends that the UAE's effective utilization of its dime powers, especially its soft powers, could help facilitate international efforts to reach a deal with Tehran over its controversial nuclear program and to revive the Middle East peace process, especially on the Israeli-Palestinian track. The dime powers of the UAE, starting with diplomacy. The UAE is highly active in the diplomatic arena. This is reflected in the number of diplomatic missions it has outside and inside the country, plus the number of international organizations it has joined. The UAE has 100 embassies and 21 consulates abroad and hosts 128 embassies in Abu Dhabi. The UAE is a member of the Gulf Cooperation Council, the Arab League, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the United Nations, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, the Non-Aligned Movement, the World Trade Organization, and the International Renewable Energy Agency that is based in Abu Dhabi. The UAE succeeded over the years in getting selected as a venue for international events, like hosting the World Economic Forum and recently the International Expo. These events have enhanced the diplomatic relations and its status on the global stage. The UAE was a lead player in the Abraham Accords that established relations with Israel, although it was not the first Arab country to sign a peace treaty with Israel. However, it was the first to fast-track the normalization process to a level not achieved by any other Arab country before. Despite Iran's occupation of 3 of UAE's islands and its likely responsibility for attacks against ships in UAE waters, Abu Dhabi chose to adopt a diplomatic approach in dealing with Tehran. The UAE diplomacy was given a big credit in brokering an end to the long war between Eritrea and Ethiopia in 2018. The UAE diplomacy remains active on the Pakistani-Indian territorial conflict in Kashmir province. Abu Dhabi has been trying to mediate a settlement to the conflict between the two nuclear powers for a while now. On information, the UAE is home to hundreds of international news outlets, media, and communication companies. It has several free zone areas dedicated to various activities related directly and indirectly to the fields of news, media, and communications. There are an estimated 2,600 companies registered in 5 media zones in the UAE. They include studies of major international news networks like CNN, CNBC, Bloomberg, Reuters, Associated Press, the BBC, Russia Today, the Chinese CCTV, the Pakistani Geo Television, and many others. The UAE invested in opening Sky News Arabic news channel. It also hosts the Al Arabiya news channel, plus Bloomberg Arabic Television, Al Sharq News. The UAE has easy and quick access to all these international outlets inside the country, and therefore can utilize them to help push a certain narrative or respond to any foreign campaigns against it. On military, the UAE has allocated a great deal of interest to building credible deterrence capabilities. It has the second biggest defense budget in the Arab world after Saudi Arabia. Its defense spending in 2020 reached $19.8 billion, which equals 5.6% of the GDP. The UAE adopted a strategy to localize the defense industry through partnerships and joint ventures with international defense companies. Dozens of UAE defense companies were established in the past few years. The main government defense holding, Edge Group, is among the top 25 defense companies globally in the size of business and sales. The UAE takes part in several annual joint exercises with regional and Western militaries to enhance fighting skills and working in multinational environments. The industrial cooperation and the joint exercises enhance political relations with other countries, which increases the UAE diplomatic soft power. The UAE supported NATO operations in Afghanistan and Libya and took part in the alliance against ISIS in Syria, and was an active member of the Saudi-led Arab Alliance fighting Houthi rebels in Yemen. Its navy took part in international efforts to combat piracy in the Horn of Africa and remains active in a few regional maritime task force. On economy, as part of the long-term strategy set by UAE leadership, known as Vision 2030, the UAE has been working diligently to diversify its economy and to reduce dependency on hydrocarbons. It's focusing on 5 main sectors: renewable and green energy, cybersecurity, information technology, space, and defense. The UAE non-oil trade went up 27% in 2021, reaching $1.9 trillion. The value of the non-oil exports reached $354 billion. The UAE has 40 charity organizations that provide humanitarian aid to countries worldwide. In 2020, the UAE provided $2.79 billion in foreign assistance that went to 170 countries. In 2019, UAE gave $8 billion in foreign aid to also about 170 countries. The UAE foreign direct investments abroad are in tens of billions of dollars, mainly in the US, UK, and the EU. One could argue that foreign aid made as a goodwill gesture and without the intention of coercion, improves the cultural appeal of the UAE and presents a means of the economic power utilized as a soft power. Therefore, the UAE does possess substantial soft powers in addition to its hard powers, and has managed to use them both to safeguard its interests and advance its foreign policy. A recent example of this was the attacks by the Iranian-backed Houthi militias in Yemen on Abu Dhabi earlier this year. The militias fired ballistic missiles and sent in attack drones that targeted an airbase and an oil storage facility. The UAE military, assisted by the US forces in the country, managed to intercept all the missiles, but few small drones, presumably launched from boats off Abu Dhabi coast, hit 3 oil tankers, setting them on fire. The UAE used its military to destroy the missile launchers, and in subsequent weeks has reportedly managed to preempt the launching of 2 ballistic missiles, destroying them on the launchers. The UAE soft powers were moving simultaneously. It pushed through its information platform the narrative of the Houthis being a terrorist organization. This supported the diplomatic power. So diplomatically, the UAE managed to win support from UN Security Council members that unanimously voted in favor of imposing a ban on supplying arms to the Houthis that were referred to as terrorist organization in the resolution. The US administration had removed the Houthis from the list of terror groups a year before. So this was a victory to UAE diplomacy. It should be noted that the UAE currently chairs the UN Security Council. On the Middle East peace process, the UAE signing of the Abraham Accords made an important impact on Arab-Israeli relations and perceptions. Its signing compelled the Israeli government to halt the building of settlements in the West Bank. The fast progress in normalization exceeded many expectations. Now, the notion of Arabs doing business with Israel have become much more common than before. Despite recent outbreaks of violence between the Palestinians and the Israelis, the Abraham Accords remained intact. Its information power kept the media coverage measured and unemotional. This showed strong commitment from the concerned parties to the success of the normalization process. Even though Egypt and Jordan signed peace treaties with Israel a few decades ago, they are yet to seriously normalize their relations with Israel. Moreover, every time tension heightens between Israel and the Palestinians, diplomatic relations with Jordan and Egypt is impacted, and they often recall their ambassadors from Tel Aviv. This time, both Cairo and Amman moved quickly to help reduce tension and did not withdraw their ambassadors. As for the UAE leadership, as for Iran, the UAE leadership has maintained political and economic relations with Tehran, despite the aggressive Iranian policies in the region. Trade and commerce remain strong between the two neighbors. The UAE National Security Advisor made a surprise visit to Tehran early December 2021, where he discussed with Iranian president the situation in the region. The visit coincided with meetings in Vienna between Iran and the signatories of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, to try and revive the 2015 nuclear agreement, which President Donald Trump withdrew from in 2018. The UAE did not make any direct accusation to Iran after the recent attacks by the Houthi militias, and kept its reaction totally focused on using its dying powers to win a strong resolution at the UN Security Council. This allowed the Vienna talks to proceed without much negative pressure from the region. As a conclusion, the UAE dying powers have demonstrated how small or medium states can utilize their capabilities to play a positive role on the international theater and at the same time protect their interests. The presentation also demonstrated how the smart use of the dying powers enabled the UAE to bring about a major change in the state of hostility between Arabs and Israelis, allowing for normalization to take place and even show resilience at times of increased violence in the occupied territories. The UAE experience could be built upon further whenever Israel resumes talks with the Palestinians, because this will make it easier for those Arab states to follow on the footsteps of Abu Dhabi in joining the Abraham Accords. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Riad. Very interesting stuff. So I'm going to bring back Adérito, and we are going to have our discussion here. So if you have any questions at all, place them in the Q&A function, and we'll get to them. At first, I just want to start off with thanking both of you for your presentations. And I have a question for Riad just off the bat here. So about UAE's soft power. So I am following the situation in Yemen very closely. And I'm wondering what effect its involvement in the Saudi coalition has on its soft power.
Well, the UAE announced some time ago, I think it's now over a year ago, nearly a couple of years, that they have pulled out from the coalition, from the alliance. And whatever forces they have a small special operations contingent there to help and training. It's in the area of Aden. Actually, the Houthi firing on Abu Dhabi was the first time that re-engaged the UAE. The UAE sent in its jet fighters and took part in operations inside Yemen after a hold for some time. The UAE in the past 2 years has had a substantial important change. For the occasion of, they have it on the 50th anniversary, which was last year, the UAE announced like 10 commandments. You can find them on the Foreign Ministry website. There's even a special page for them in which they repositions their foreign policy to emphasize their soft powers as their main tool for their foreign policy from now on, you know. And so there is less referring to the hard powers and more reference to the soft powers, where the UAE is trying to position itself now as like the Switzerland of the Arab world, you know, that's always engaging, mediating, helping resolve conflicts in the region or around the region between its neighbors. So it's a new image, it's a new approach the UAE has adopted and now seems to be adhering to.
All right. So Adérito, I want to come back to your presentation a little bit, and maybe you can clarify some of the points that I saw. Now, you mentioned in your presentation that France had originally supported the nuclear capabilities of Iraq and Iran. I was wondering if you could clarify that and why exactly that would be something that France would do, if it was in their interest or kind of like what the reasoning was for that. I'm guessing that was during the De Gaulle administration. That's just a guess.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. So, during the 60s, we are living the Gaulle era, and of course, the question of also in the aftermath of the Suez Canal and all that, but mostly had to do with the Gaulle wanting to have some kind of power to be independent from Soviet Union and the US at the same time. So he helped the Israelis to do the nuclear program in that context, in that Gaullism context. With the question of Iraq and Iran, at the time, France was kind of a nuclear proliferator. Tried to make as much as countries to have, in that region, had interest to share that kind of technology with those countries. We have to understand that there was a time that they were doing that before the NPT, which is the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, entry into force. So after the 70s, we still see that France is somehow helping some of these countries with their nuclear programs, but not as much as in the 60s. And then progressively, there's actually a very interesting article on this journal article by two French scholars that talk about how the diplomatic practices of the diplomacy and the elites of France change over time, because they were able to adhere to some norms through their through their meetings with other, and also being in conferences in the UN and all that, and how that changed France's rebellious, should I say, proliferator behavior during the 50s, 60s, and early 70s, and how by the beginning of the 90s, France completely changed their game on that, and had to do with also the elites that change also their views, military and also diplomatic elites that change their views over this idea that more nuclear weapons perhaps is better than just have some countries have them. So I have to mention also at the same time that France only adhered to the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty in 1992, so after the end of the Cold War. So as I said, the reason why they had economic reasons as well, but the reason was more this kind of trying to be in the middle of these two powers, these two great powers, and trying to create some confusion. But after the Cold War was ended, so so also the risk ended for them as well, and also had to do with also this progressive elite changing their attitudes towards the norms, the nuclear norms, which actually started, should I say, perhaps the change in the late 70s and 80s. So that's the question of France. When I mentioned Germany, is that Germany was not directly involved, should I say, in sponsoring the Israeli program, but they fund. In the beginning, when they were doing their fund, and later on they, even until recently, but perhaps it's not very political, but political correct to say this, but until recently they were given some weaponry that could accommodate nuclear warheads. We're talking about submarines and also fighters. So they were selling fighters and submarines that could, accommodate nuclear warheads. but again, the question of Israel is tricky because they don't declare it if they have nuclear weapons or not. So we are just talking. I'm just talking about declassified documents that were released by the United States, Russia, and other countries, and also in Europe, and also, of course, some research work made by some nuclear historians. So I just took the evidence from that. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's an open secret that Israel has nuclear weapons, right?
Yeah.
And now I'm wondering that, I mean, there are many among us who would love to see fewer nuclear weapons in the world. And but among those powers that do have nuclear weapons, there are some states that just seem to be beyond the reach of reasonable discourse, like North Korea, or some of these states where the international rules-based order just simply says, these states, absolutely, it's unacceptable for them to have nuclear weapons. Now, that said, I'm wondering what, and again, there are others among us who think that, well, you know, the more states that have nuclear weapons, maybe there's more of a deterrent and maybe there will be fewer, less conflict among those states. So I am wondering, and Riad might be able to comment on this as well, where does Israel fit in with Middle East nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation, and how might nuclear deterrence play out should other powers in the Middle East declare their, despite the NPT, they're wanting to develop nuclear technology. I mean, Israel is seemingly lobbing missiles into Syria every week here. They've been attacking Iranian installations. Would that sort of thing stop if, you know, it's some of these countries decided that they wanted to acquire nuclear weapons?
Should I go ahead or go Riad? I don't know if he wants to take.
Whoever.
No. So okay. So the question. Let's start with the. Let me see if I can frame this in this context. So the question of Israel. They have nuclear weapons for their survival of their state because they're surrounded by, according to them, adversary countries, states. But of course, they having nuclear weapons open a Pandora box. So then countries like Iran want to pursue as well because they also consider themselves as regional powers, a regional power. And of course, we know that because of the JCPOA, Iran was, and JCPOA was an acquisition by the United States, was able to help proxies like Syria, Yemen, and others, to reflect their own interests on the region. At the same time, countries like Saudi Arabia didn't like that, and what I can say about this is that there is a dilemma on the region with the JCPOA, because Saudi Arabia is not very happy with the conditions given to the Iran with the JCPOA, and Saudi Arabia can pursue. I'm not saying that it will, but there is a risk of they can pursue nuclear weapons if they see they are in a disadvantaged position regarding, the rising power of Iran. This is their perspective. I'm not saying it's mine. So there is this kind of paradox, kind of dilemma that is going on. I think possibly could happen. One of the examples that we can see now, because of the nuclear crisis with Ukraine and Russia and NATO, the Saudis didn't like the approach of the Americans towards the revival of JCPOA, and as a reply, this is in the news. They are starting negotiating their selling their oil instead of through dollars, but now with the currency of China, yuan. So I think there's a lot of dynamics going on And I think Iran is the key. One thing is certain: Israel and Saudi Arabia, regarding Iran, they are in the same boat. Interestingly, they have a common, should I say, adversary, and I think they are not very, they don't welcome very much the idea of this a very rewarding JCPOA in terms of, you know, less sanctions and more transactions and all that. So they see that as a risk. So I'm not sure. So the earlier administration of the United States, they listened more to them, to the Israelis and to the Saudis. This administration, they are focused more on preventing Iran from you know, getting these weapons, because there's also this breakout, which is the time that Iranians can reach to a nuclear weapon if they want. So this is a dilemma. So I think Saudi Arabia is really one of those countries, and perhaps also the UAE, that could. It's important to have some kind of dialogue between these countries as well, because if you leave Saudi Arabia out of this JCPOA process entirely, that could bring other like problems in the region, and so that's my perspective. That's my opinion. I don't know, perhaps.
Well, if I have to say something on that, I took part in several Track 2 meetings related to the nuclear-free zone in the Middle East. And I even helped co-organize actually a few Track 2s with the Iranians, all that also addressed the nuclear program. When it comes to the nuclear regional nuclear-free zone, so long as Israel has Israel or the world does not want to address and recognize Israel's possession of nuclear weapons, it's very hard to see the region becoming a nuclear-free zone. There's the positions of especially Egypt and Algeria and a few other countries in the region, even when talking sub-regions. I mean, they entertained ideas in these Track 2 meetings to divide the Middle East into sub-regions. So let's try and make the Gulf region as a nuclear-free, and then separate the Gulf region from the rest of the Levant and from North Africa. It didn't really work that well. However, when it comes to JCPOA, the question here is not more about the opposition to the nuclear program. The one that has a really big issue with the nuclear program is Israel, and to a lesser extent are the Saudis and the Emiratis and the other. The big issue for the Saudis and the Emiratis when it comes to JCPOA is that it ignored the Iranian behavior. Let's remember something, you know, when France was helping Iran nuclear program during the time of the Shah, nobody had an issue of this because Iran was not seen to be a hostile regime. And that had a problem with many countries of the world, and it did not have the guards that are spreading in a region, creating militias here and there, and so forth. So it's the worry, the concern here is of Iran's intentions more than the issue of Iran's nuclear capabilities. Iran, as is right now, is a major headache and is a major threat to many countries with its conventional capabilities. With it having non-conventional capabilities will become a bigger headache. So the main issue for the countries of the region is that the US and the West were happy to see Iran do whatever it wants in the region so long as Iran halted its nuclear program. This was not okay with the countries of the region. So this was, and here was, this what actually this what killed the JCPOA, because the countries of the region were suffering constantly from the Iranian intervention into their affairs, from the its expansionist policy, and that weighed in on the JCPOA and led to its demise. Now, I think they are repeating the same mistake. They are now going to go back and they're going to ignore Iran's ballistic missile program. They're going to ignore Iran's behavior and action in the region, and they're going to just focus entirely on the nuclear program, which is not okay with the countries of the region and not even with Israel. So here is the catch-22 we have before us, is that what should be the priority? I mean, the US is saying we should focus totally on nuclear program and we deal with the non-nuclear Iran separately. The others are saying no, because when you are allowing Iran to have all this money and to lift all the sanctions, then Iran is going to become a serious headache, as serious of a headache as if it is a nuclear state. Now, the West is turning a blind eye, allowing Saudi Arabia to build ballistic missiles. So we're going to see ballistic missile proliferation in the region, so that there will be some sort of an equilibrium with Iran, just because the focus has to stay on the nuclear program and it is not leading us anywhere. So I think that's why we have this very hard dilemma that the world is dealing with now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, Scott, can I just say something? Yeah.
Sure. We have about a minute left in the session, by the way.
Excuse me?
We have about a minute left in the session. So.
Oh, okay. No, I just want to say to Riad, thank you so much for that. For that explanation. Actually, I was not saying differently from you. I said that, the JCPOA showed to countries like Saudi Arabia and Israel. I think I put these two in this part. That reward that Iran was able to use their money that they received without the sanctions to to finance proxies. That's the calling of the problems that you were talking about. So that was the issue, and I think this is the issue with the Saudis and many countries in the region, that they are afraid that the history could repeat itself again, that they would use that again to to expand their interests through their proxy wars in the region, and that's his issue. And in this case, Israel and Saudi Arabia are in the same. In this case of the threat, they are in the same place. So.
All right, with that, I'm going to end the session. So Adérito, Vicente, and Riad Kahwaji, thank you very much for your comments and your papers, and we will call this to a close. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.